This is the Business Pulse podcast, where you'll discover strategies, tools, and stories to inspire success through conversations with leading business owners, startup founders, and venture capitalists. Our aim is your success. Presented by XKOVA, a next-generation payment processor to help your business thrive. Visit us at xkova.com. Welcome to the Business Pulse podcast. My name is Candice Jarrett. Today, we are thrilled to host our first guest for our inaugural episode, Nick Jain, CEO of IdeaScale, the innovation software powering organizations like NASA, Comcast, NASCAR, and more. A top graduate of Harvard Business School with a degree in mathematics from Dartmouth, Nick is a recognized expert in fostering innovation cultures and driving profitable growth. We are so excited to have him as our inaugural guest today. So thank you for helping me break the champagne on the side of the boat and ready to jump in. So
thanks so much, Cam.
I want to first talk to you about the CEO hustle. So you have recently had a lot of growth with IdeaScale, and I saw on LinkedIn that you mentioned that it was kind of like a team effort. Can you jump into that a little bit?
Sure. So IdeaScale has now been around for 15 years. I joined about 2 years ago as CEO of the company. Really excited to be here. And over the past year or 2 years, we have grown internationally. So we are now in 8 countries. I've got about 100 employees, customers in several dozen countries. And that's been kind of an exciting journey for us to go from really a North America focused company to a more global company. And that's obviously a part of just growing as a company, but also it's part of our mission. We want to be the providers of innovation software. We want to enable innovation kind of globally. And that doesn't just mean American companies or American government agencies. We want to be there for a South African government or for a university in the Middle East. We want to support global innovation. So it's been really fun. It has obviously been very challenging because when you're managing a global team, you have time zones, cultural differences, holidays, right? Like our employees in Mexico today, I think it's a national holiday in Mexico today. And a couple of weeks ago, it's holidays for our teams in India and Bangladesh. And then obviously in 2 weeks, we have, American Thanksgiving coming up. So being global and growing poses some challenges, but it's a fun journey to be on.
So I guess I would like to talk about your journey and then zoom out into the challenges of managing a project this large. So can you talk about what is your personal business journey like from your beginnings to how you got to be the CEO of IdeaScale?
Sure. I break my life into kind of 4 chunks. Number one, I grew up in a small farm town in Canada, lots of horses, lots of berries. And one of my first jobs was shoveling horse manure. So that's where I started. That and shaking the sign outside Little Caesars. I was one of those board boys. Second was obviously education. As you mentioned, I studied math, physics, went to business school at Harvard, got a lot of good education, both on the business side as well as the analysis side of things. Third chunk of my career so far has been in Wall Street, where I was a professional investor in large cap private equity and hedge funds. And for the fourth stage, which is where I'm kind of at right now, is for the last 5 or so years, I've been a professional CEO. So either private equity firms, venture capital firms, or founders hire me to be the CEO of companies that are ready for that next stage of growth and success. I'm on my third company so far. The first was a $100 million revenue trucking company. Second was a men's shoe startup. And third is IdeaScale, which is awesome to be at. And it's what I want to do.
So what is the biggest difference between IdeaScale and the other 2 ventures from a execution standpoint of what you do?
Sure. I think 3 things. Number one, the other 2 jobs, I was part of executive teams where I was part of a 2-person or 3-person executive team rather than the CEO. So the level of responsibility I have here is greater. Number 2, IdeaScale is a global company rather than the other 2 companies were very much America focused. And then the third is the product or service we're selling. The other, when you're dealing with trucking, you're moving physical goods back and forth. When you're selling shoes, you're actually selling shoes. Software is a fundamentally different business because there's not a physical good, there's not a service, but there is a product. It's kind of weird where you have a product, but there's no physicalness to the product. And so figuring that out, how do you create a good physical product? It's not just a service, it's not consulting, but also it doesn't exist anywhere in the world. It's not tangible. No one can even see it. Even the engineers, they're all seeing lines of code that is distinct from the product. It's very different than, let's say, if you're selling a toy or shoes or heavy machinery.
So I want to talk about the global nature of software. Do you have any big challenges with regulation in different markets or even just reaching into different markets to grow the company, even though the company is quite large? I'm sure that there's places that you want to be.
Sure. I think from a regulatory perspective, not so much. Over the last decade or so, as the internet has become a truly, there's been a greater regulatory coordination between different government agencies. Regulation is reasonably similar, with the exception of maybe, the differences, slight difference between GDPR versus American security practices versus East Asian security practice. So for the most part, regulatory, it's very similar across the countries. Geopolitics does matter. So we are a United States-based company. Obviously, the United States has geopolitical allies and geopolitical folks that, organizations that they are less friendly with. So we have to make sure that we are compliant with the US departments or US government's restrictions on us doing business with certain countries. So that obviously means that there's certain countries we just don't engage in because that is our, legal requirement for the country we're excited to be based in, the United States. And then the third challenge is we enter markets. The biggest challenge is obviously getting feet on the ground and being responsive to their a cultural way of doing business, but B, also the price point. So the price point, we have, customers in sub-Saharan Africa. The price point there, as well as the cultural differences that we have to deal with, are very different than, let's say, the Middle East, than Latin America, than the United States, than France, than India. And we have to be responsive. Again, both of those cultural differences, the ways you do business, the way you sell, the way you interact with those, the expectations, but also the price points that are relevant to each of those markets.
So excellent answer. So you have like some huge organizations using IdeaScale. Can you talk about how a large organization like NASA might use it as opposed to a small user like somewhere else in the world?
Sure. So first of all, our software is completely free for organizations less than 100 people, or teams less than 100 people. So if you're an individual entrepreneur or you're a 99-person team at Samsung, which is a bajillion-dollar corporation, our software is completely free. And that our paying customers are obviously large-scale organizations because that's where our software adds the most value. The software fundamentally is exactly the same. I would describe us as TikTok for ideas or a CRM for ideas. So instead of putting in funny cat videos, you put your ideas for your new products, your ideas for your new manufacturing processes. You put those all into IdeaScale. People vote them up and down. Algorithms vote up and down, and the best ideas rise to the top. In the same way that some silly viral cat video would rise on TikTok, we help you the best idea rise. And that's really valuable for a large organization because you can imagine that the CEO maybe of a 1,000-person organization or the executive team or the chief product officer is so many levels away from the people who are on the ground and serving the customers, or even if they're not levels away, they may be geographically far away, right? If the company's based in Japan, how do their American employees communicate effectively with their executives? That's sometimes very difficult. I apologize. There's a fire alarm going off. Apologies for that. Sorry.
No,
Fire alarm.
Home,
working from home today, so I have to deal with the crazy fire alarm situations.
it's part of the new world. The new world is have these like crazy things happen.
Yes, your question was about large scale organizations, but basically our software helps solve two problems. Number one, helps make sure that the entire organization can communicate with their executives. And number two, executives are busy. They don't have the time to listen to every single idea because some ideas are stupid ideas, right? So it helps the best ideas rise to the top really quickly. And from a diverse organization that could be across the world, across language barriers, across hierarchical barriers, departments, units, etc.
I actually already know a company where I was talking with an employee who had several meetings with the CEO. She had a bunch of ideas that he really loved, and she was mentioning that she wished that there was a way that people in her organization, because she had heard it from her colleagues, like have these great ideas, but don't necessarily get that FaceTime with the CEO to bring it up to the top of the chain. I love this so much. When we get off the call, I'm going to recommend it to her.
I recommend it. Again, software is completely free if she's part of a small team there, right?
Yeah.
So, or not small. 99 isn't small, actually.
They're a big team. They have a couple hundred, so they'll be in your pricing tier, but that's okay.
Perfect.
If it's something that works. So actually, do you have like a demo or anything? So if a larger organization is trying to come on board, what's your process?
Yeah, so look, anybody can go to ideascale.com, click Get Started Free at the top, and you can literally use the software. And at some point, when you hit 100 users, it'll say, go talk to sales. But so if you are a billion-dollar corporation, you can get started in 30 seconds right now. No downloads required. It's your typical software entirely on the cloud. So large organizations can, and it's not a free trial. It's truly unlimited until you hit 99 or 100 users.
Wow, that's beautiful. So many absolutely epic organizations use it to recommend it. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your personal journey. Like if somebody is just starting out in their business career and they want to get to be at the helm of a global organization, what is the best advice that you can give somebody that would lead to their success?
I would say three things. Number one, invest in education early in your career that pays dividends. And I don't mean necessarily go to fancy schools or get university degrees, but like learn skills, right? And those could be carpentry skills if you're pursuing a career in like carpentry, or those could be math skills if you're becoming a professor, right? Invest in those skills because mastering those skills will pay dividends for decades to come. The math education that I got in college, I didn't actually use for the first 10 or 15 years in my career, but it's actually coming real now that AI has become a big thing. I can actually draw on this stuff that's incredibly valuable from like 10 or 15 years ago. Number two, work hard. It is really hard to lead a large organization. You need to be willing to work hard for decades. People don't become CEOs or executives. Most people, I should say, don't become it because they just get lucky. Some do, certainly, but many have put in decades of work to achieve those outcomes, and myself included, right? I work really hard and have for a long time. Number three, decide what your career goals are. For me, it was I wanted to make an impact by leading a large-scale organization. That was my career goal. So that's what I work towards. For other people, that may not actually bring them joy or meaning in their lives. Then they shouldn't do it. Like, not everybody wants to do that in life. Right? Some people want to be artists. I don't want to be an artist, which is why I never worked towards being an artist.
I see that you do enjoy art in the background. I see like action figures, Transformers.
Yeah, so those are those three action figures in the background are from a TV show I loved as a kid. It's a giant fighting robot. From a video game I played about 3-4 years ago called Dark Souls. It's a very famous video game that's notoriously difficult. And then the third is, it's hard to see, it's very dark, is a guy with a giant sword. He was from a comic book series that's been running since the 1980s. And unfortunately, the author died like 2 years ago as he was 80% done. And like there was a Twitter kind of war, millions of people around the world commemorating this guy, but also being pissed off that he had died 80% of the way through a comic they've been waiting 40 years to finish.
Wow. Well, it's I mean that's an amazing legacy that he was able to touch so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the name of the comic?
The name of the comic is Berserk, and the author or artist's name was Kentaro Miura. I'm not a comic book guy, by the way. It was just something I like ran into when I was in my late teens, and it was like so vivid. It was like the original dark fantasy that spawned so much, or that influenced much of dark fantasy for the last 20, 30 years.
You mentioned that you put in many decades of work in order to get to this point. What is, in your opinion, a good work-life balance with all the stuff that you're doing?
Sure. So I don't have work-life balance. I want to be very clear. I work insanely hard. I'm on more or less 24 hours a day and have been for a long time. But not having work-life balance does not mean I don't sleep or don't do other things in my life. I'm married. I'm about to have a kid in a couple of weeks.
Well,
I play a lot of poker. I read. So like, I have lots of things going on in my life, but my life is incredibly unbalanced and unstable, but that's okay because that is the right mix of things that give me joy. This same mix may not work for my kids. It may not work for it doesn't work for my best friend in life. So the practical thing is like, do the things in life that give you joy. The life I live gives me tremendous joy, which is why I'm able to sustain it. The day that changes, that it does not give me joy, I won't do it because I'm not going to be able to put in the hours to, or live the life, be able to continue doing what I'm doing today.
I appreciate the honest and candid answer, and I feel the same way. Someone asked me recently if I had work-life balance, and I'm like, no, because like I love what I'm doing, so I just I do it a lot. So yeah, that's a beautiful answer. I guess where do you see yourself in 5 years from now?
Sure. So IdeaScale is at a really cool point in its history where we are expanding globally. The need for innovation software has stopped being a thing just in a few Western nations, and now it's in demand in a lot of places. We're seeing demand from Middle Eastern countries, from major East Asian multi-billion-dollar organizations. They're realizing that innovation is hard. It's hard in a large organization. It gets harder the larger and more successful you get. Organizations today, right? If you look at Google or Samsung or Facebook, these organizations are next to the employees of the largest organizations 20 years ago, right? They're trillion-dollar organizations, and that was unheard of in 2001. So the problem of remaining connected with your employees, with your customers, is growing exponentially as the scale of organizations grow. So IdeaScale has a lot of runway to growth, and I would love to continue to be part of that journey and make us that billion-dollar organization over the next several years.
That is the biggest room for growth. Like, do you see the biggest room for growth in obtaining larger companies that are in other markets that you haven't reached yet? Or is it in these individual small companies that are less than 100 users?
Sure. So I would say it's our customer group. Really, the big problem we solve is for large, complex organizations. So that's going to be our bread and potatoes for the foreseeable future. For smaller organizations, the software is available free, but again, it's less. If you're a 5-person organization, a whiteboard, getting a physical whiteboard and some 3M post-it notes is probably a better solution than buying fancy, complex software like ours. So I'd say the 3 vectors for growth are as follows. Number 1 is within the United States, we only have like a couple hundred customers. We have lots of customers there. We don't have the entire Fortune 1000 yet. We should. We should have the Fortune 1000. We should have every major state government, every agency within the state governments, every federal agency. They should all be using us. Every major city or municipal government should be using us. Like anybody who's over 1,000 employees should use us. And there's a lot of organizations. There's thousands of such organizations in the United States that we have yet to tap. Number 2, growing internationally, doing the same thing we're doing in the United States overseas. There are many, many countries in the world. There's 200 and something countries in the world. We should be serving all of them, serving their private sector organizations, their nonprofit, their educational, their government organizations. And number 3 is adding more products to support different parts of the innovation cycle. So our core product, as I mentioned, is basically a social network for ideas. But there's other parts of the innovation process that we do less well or that we don't have a product for today. I shouldn't say we do it less well. We're just not there yet. We don't have a whiteboarding solution. We don't have a project management solution. We don't have an AI co-pilot. These are all new product lines that we have already roadmapped and have announced or will be announcing over the next year or so that will allow us to support a greater portion of the innovation cycle of every organization.
You mentioned that you have employees all around the world. How big is your company right now?
We have about 100 people across 8 countries right now.
Excellent. So are you going to be hiring people? Should people watch ideascale.com to see if there's employment opportunities?
We're almost always hiring. Right now, I think we're hiring 2 people in Bangladesh, 1 in Mexico. We may be hiring 1 in the United States. I don't manage day-to-day hiring, obviously. So we are hiring. The best place to find jobs and opportunities with us is usually on our LinkedIn page, where we announce all the global positions we are hiring for, as well as the skill sets that we are looking for.
Actually, mentioning day to day, I know that each day might look different, but just on a broad overview, like what does a day in the life of Nick Jain look like?
Sure. So I would wake up around 6, go to the gym, come down, after going to the gym or going outside for a run, have some breakfast. Then as I would fire up my computer, I would do 3 things. First is I have a literal tab called Daily Reports in my Chrome. I click on that. That opens 10 different tabs that will show me how my engineering team is doing, how my product team is doing, how my sales team is doing, how my marketing, basically a tab with a bunch of graphs. And I'll flip through each of them, make sure there's nothing odd or good or bad. If anything catches my eye, I'll fire off some questions. The second portion of my day is comprised of meetings. Those could be internal managerial meetings, which is pretty much my entire Monday, for example, or external meetings. And then the third part of my day is sitting down and doing what I would call heads down work. Right now, the heads down work is primarily spent on either organizational design, like how do we make sure the organization scales effectively and I don't become a bottleneck. And number 2, on the product portion, as I mentioned, we're coming out with some big new product releases and I'm speccing them out to hand off to the product and design teams.
I want to go back on a question that I had forgotten to ask you earlier, but I don't want to miss it. What is the number one thing that you felt was the most valuable thing that you learned at Harvard Business School?
It's a tough one. I would say, look, HBS, there's a lot of smart people there, professors, students, executives that come. The funny thing is you learn a lot of valuable things from a knowledge perspective. But the thing that I learned that was most valuable was all these intelligent people. It is so easy for even these intelligent, highly educated people to make gut decisions that go against what is known to be the right answer. So I had one of the chief human resources officers from one of the biggest companies in the world. It's a 30 or $40 billion organization, one of the biggest banks in the world. And he came and talked about how they do hiring. And he actually came and said, look, we know all the research says that you shouldn't interview people during hiring. We've known this for decades. And yet he says we still interview people because it just feels right. And that's just funny to me, the executive, somebody making 10, 50 million bucks a year who's telling you he knows better. And yet he's still doing the thing that is the opposite of what he knows is right. That's a valuable lesson for me because it forces me to check myself saying, look, if all these intelligent people are going against what is known to be right, make sure that I'm not falling into the trap of going by my gut, but rather by what the facts and evidence say.
That is really fascinating. Do you think that there are ever situations where your gut might be right? And then how do you make that distinction?
I never make decisions based on gut. Full stop. My gut may give me a indication of where to go, but analysis will always derive my decision making in any decision of consequence, I should say. So, what food I want to have, whether it be, sushi or I'm going to bake bread, that is inconsequential. So no, I'm not going to put analysis to that, but to whether to hire someone, to add a new product, whether to, marry my wife a long time ago now. Those are all decisions where I intentionally say, look, gut decisions are bad. Let's do what the analysis said.
That's awesome. Things. So the first is, what is your base advice that you could give somebody who, we talked about people who are in the beginning of their careers, but what would be your advice to somebody switching their careers?
Sure. So I'll go back to kind of the three pieces of advice I would give for long-term career success. Invest in education. The great thing is invest in education today, whether you're early stage or mid stage, go learn new skills. And as a practical example, I spend personally, I'm already a CEO of a successful company. I spend between 10 to 40 hours every month, taking actual courses in new skills. This month, for example, my goal was to complete 2 courses in machine learning. I've done one of them. I've got one more left to do, right? And that's a new skill that I'm still continuing to develop because it may be useful today. It may be useful in 5 years, but I need to keep making my skills relevant. And I've been doing that for years, and I encourage other folks to do so as well. And it doesn't have to be something technical. It could be, how to paint. Invest in some form of education on learning. Whether or not you get a degree or certificate doesn't matter. Go invest in that learning. Number 2, go meet people. Important to meet people constantly in your life, whether it be socially or professionally, for 2 reasons. Number 1, you will develop important social skills. Social skills are a volume or experience-based game. You learn how to talk to people by talking to people. And number 2, obviously those connections can come and become beneficial over time, right? There's the classic stories. Somebody met somebody in high school, they don't talk for 20 years, and then they realize they love each other and fall in love. And the same applies in business too. Relationships take a long time to build and cultivate, and that is important both for your personal and professional success.
That's a beautiful answer. I want to ask you, what is your favorite business book that you've ever read?
Undoubtedly, it's called Valuation by Aswad Damodar, and he's a professor of finance at NYU. It's a technical book on how businesses work. It requires some serious math, some high school math, I should say, but it's not a light read. You need to sit down with pen and paper and make sure you understand all the equations he talks about. But it tells you why capitalism works. It tells you how businesses make money. It tells you which businesses suck and which don't.
That's awesome. Do you read any fiction?
Yeah. So I'm reading Tolkien's poems right now. One of my favorite podcasts is The History of Literature. It gives you the biography of all the authors around the world. So last night I was listening to an episode from the History of Literature podcast, which was the family history of Charles Dickens. So he apparently lived a really weird personal life. So yes, I read a ton of I call it, well, my personal reading is truly low-end junk literature. Stuff that people would be ashamed of having on their shelves. And, I listen to, watch a lot of junk TV. There's lots of stuff that is non-technical in my life.
Actually, I'm so happy that you mentioned this, because I think that more people should want to read a range of different fiction, and that, not feel that everything that they need to read needs to be Shakespeare and needs to be super highbrow. Reading is just for, shifting your mindset, for experiencing a different walk of life, a new perspective, empathy. I mean,
I think you're giving too much credit to me. I read the stuff because it gives me fun, not because it is fun, not because it changes my perspective or creates empathy. I just the stuff I enjoy entertainment-wise is incredibly lowbrow.
Do you read any science fiction?
So yes, I finished the Foundation series by Asimov about a year and a half ago, all 7 or 8 books. And it's on my list of things to read, Asimov's iRobot series, hopefully in 2025.
Did you ever read, I have it on my bookshelf, Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir?
I have not, no.
The reason why I mention it is because there's so much math in that book. I just thought that maybe you would be interested in it.
Well, the problem with math, any book that has math is then I get nitpicky. So when I watch Big Bang Theory, right?
Yeah.
So I was one of those guys watching Big Bang Theory, and it frustrated me every time I saw an equation was wrong on the board, or whether they said something factually untrue.
Yeah. Yeah, it suspends disbelief, because you're I see that.
Yeah, somebody's got I'm not a PhD at Caltech, and if I know that equation is wrong, I'm sure those guys do, because one of them apparently wins a Nobel Prize at the end.
Yeah, they probably should have maybe gotten some,
they did, really, but they did have consultants. They did actually have very smart consultants. It's at some point the show wasn't really about, what they were doing for their careers, but about the personal relationships, which is
Right.
very common, by the way, right? Like, Sex in the City, if you think about choosing something from an entirely different genre, if you look at the early seasons versus the late seasons, the early seasons, there was a lot more investment into what those women were doing for their careers or life outside that. And by the end, it was like, who are they dating?
Yeah. I didn't really follow that show, but I think that's a good analogy for people. Yeah. So, yeah, you might read that and be like, oh, the physics is completely wrong in this, because it's kind of theorizing like building a spaceship and traveling through space and all that. Anyway, this has been such an awesome conversation. I'm so happy that you joined me. Thank you very much. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with regarding IdeaScale?
Yeah, two things. Number one, just a quick plug again. Our software is completely free for organizations or teams less than 100. It's on ideascale.com. Click Get Started Free. It takes less than 30 seconds to be on and running. I highly encourage folks to use it. Number two, if folks want to get in touch with me personally, best way is through LinkedIn. My name is Nick Jain. DM me. I'll be glad to respond.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. Really appreciate having you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Candice. It was wonderful to be your inaugural guest.